Hello, my name is Madeline Willoughby, and today I will be explaining what I learned in Chapter 6. This chapter really stuck out to me, and it was really interesting to learn the different types of learning and what processes go into learning a new subject. Learning is essentially a permanent change to behavior and knowledge. Learning is basically building blocks. For example, when you learn a new topic, your brain uses associative learning to make connections and build on top of pre-existing knowledge. As humans, and this goes for any other organism as well, we have instincts and reflexes that are unlearned behaviors. Instincts are behaviors that are basically set behaviors that aren't taught. An example of this is birds migrating south for the winter. Reflexes are also hardwired behaviors. However, they tend to be simpler than instincts. An example of this would be our pupils dilating and or adjusting to the brightness or darkness of a room. Reflexes tend to be singular motor actions, while instincts tend to be more complex actions. There are three types of learning, which are classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning, also known as modeling. Ivan Pavlov unintentionally led to the discovery of classical conditioning. It all started out with him in his lab with some dogs. He realized that the dogs would start salivating at the sound of the lab assistant's footsteps because they learned to associate them with food. The dog's salivating is a reflex, which is not a learned behavior, and Pavlov knew this, which led him to wonder why they would do this. Throughout his research and experiments, he found that the dogs would salivate at things unrelated to food, such as a touch to the leg, a light, and the most popular one, a ring of a bell. He discovered that organisms have two responses to their environment, which are unconditioned stimulus, or reflexes, and conditioned, learned, responses. And like I explained earlier, reflexes are unconditioned motor responses which are most of the time uncontrollable. He then let the dogs smell the food, which was an unconditioned stimulus. Then the dogs started salivating, which was an unconditioned response. He then introduced a neutral stimulus, which was the ringing of a bell before being given food. By pairing the neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus, the food, and got the unconditioned response, the salivation to the food, and repeated this over and over until eventually the ring of the bell, originally the neutral stimulus, became the conditioned stimulus, which triggered in conditioned response, the salivation to the bell without any food present. In some research that I've conducted in my free time, I have noticed that there are lots of examples of classical conditioning in everyday life. VeryWellHealth.com explains some of the daily examples of classical conditioning. One example is advertising. An advertisement may show people having fun and being happy with a certain product, the neutral stimulus. And over time, we start to associate happiness and fun to said product. Then we are more likely to buy that product, which is the desired outcome by the company, the conditioned response. This may be part of the reason why we see the same ads over and over again. They're trying to inflict classical conditioning. Next up is operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is when an organism learns to associate specific behavior with a reward or punishment. B.F. Skinner believed that behaviors are driven by reinforcements and punishments. His thinking was based off law of effect created by Edward Thorndike, which explained that a behavior associated with a reward is more likely to be repeated, and a behavior associated with punishment is less likely to be repeated. Basing his work off of Thorndike's law of effect, Skinner began conducting experiments on animals to observe how they would react to punishment and reward. He began placing animals into what is now known as a Skinner box, which is a box with a lever which the rat would push to receive food, a speaker, lights, and a recorder to record the rat's response. The rat would receive a positive reinforcement whenever the lever was pressed. The reinforcement in this case was food. There are different types of reinforcements and punishments. Positive reinforcement is giving an organism something pleasurable after they've done a desired behavior. Negative reinforcement is taking something away that the organism doesn't like in result of them doing a desired behavior. And positive punishment is giving the organism an unpleasurable thing as a result of the organism doing an undesired behavior. And a negative punishment is taking something away from the organism that the organism finds pleasurable as a result of them doing an undesired behavior. A real-life example of this would be a child throwing a tantrum and the mother taking away its favorite toy. Because throwing a tantrum is an undesired behavior, this would be negative punishment. But it takes the organism time to learn this behavior. They must do something called shaping. Shaping is where you reward the organism for getting close to the desired behavior, and you keep trying to get the organism to get closer and closer to the desired behavior until it eventually achieves the desired behavior. Another example of operant learning is a teacher wanting her students to push in their chairs before class ends. She might tell her students they will receive candy so that they are more likely and more motivated to do the desired behavior. Last but not least is observational learning. Observational learning is, learning by observing and copying something. The organism that is being observed and copied is called the model, hence how observational learning got the name modeling. Albert Bandura says that there is more to observational learning than just copying behavior. He believed that learning had some more to do than just reinforcements. He felt that mental states had a role in learning, and he felt that observational learning was more than just watching and copying. He identified 3 types of observational learning models, which are live, symbolic, and verbal. A verbal model is whenever someone explains something to you without physically showing you how to do it. A live model is whenever someone shows you how to physically do something, and a symbolic model is when real people in books, TV, or movies show you how to do something, or teach you something. To successfully learn a behavior throughout observational learning, you must have attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. You must be paying fully attention to what is being modeled for you to understand the behavior being taught. You must retain the information given. You must be able to reproduce the behavior taught to you, and you must want to copy the behavior. An example of this can be a teacher giving verbal instructions in class, verbally observing the information, retaining it, replicating it when doing work later on, and having the motivation to want to replicate the behavior. Observational learning, however, can have its downsides. For example, a parent can exhibit a violent act or behavior, and a child can observe and imitate that later. But observational learning can also have its upsides too. A parent wanting their child to eat their fruits and vegetables, for example, the parent can eat fruits and vegetables with their meals and let the child observe the behavior. You can also teach the child to have compassion, friendliness, honesty, and more by exhibiting those behaviors yourself and allowing them to observe. A daily example of observational learning is watching one of your classmates turn in an assignment and receive a sticker. You learn by observing that once you turn in your assignment, you will receive a sticker. I found this topic very interesting, and it was very entertaining to read and learn about. One thing I found the most interesting, however, is about observational learning. It was fascinating how observed behaviors can be observed and retained as a child and be replicated years later as an adult without needing to observe that behavior again. An example of this is how 30% of child abuse victims grow up to be abusive parents themselves. Now, this might not be the best behavior to replicate, but it is still a learned behavior through observational learning. There are so many ways that observational learning, operant learning, and classical conditioning tie into daily life. These types of learning and understanding how they work are very detrimental to grasping a better understanding of human behavior. It is important because we get a better understanding on how we learn It gives us a better understanding about human behavior and why we act the way we do. For example, it gives us a better understanding on why advertisements work and how companies of said ad want us to buy a product as the desired outcome, classical conditioning. It also emphasizes the importance of learning how we learn visually, symbolically, and verbally. And it is thanks to operant conditioning. It helps us to understand why we want to learn a behavior more and when given a reward, and why we are less likely to do a behavior when we receive a punishment. Overall, this was very thought-provoking, and I really enjoyed reading and writing about this topic. It helped me better understand how the learning process works and how learning ties in to our behavior and how we act.